Good morning, everyone. I am Associate Professor Dr. Ruth Sithichai, who is the chair of this session. This session title is Bullying in School and Online, Research Approaches from Europe and Africa. May I introduce you to two keynote speakers. First, Dorte Marie Søndergaard is a professor in social psychology at Aarhus University in Denmark. She was the leader of the large interdisciplinary research project, Experts, Exploring Bullying in School, which contribute with groundbreaking knowledge about how to conceptualize bullying and effect of heterogeneously combined forces. These forces include, among other, social, cultural, disruptive, digital, and subject processes in children and young people in everyday life. Søndergaard has co-edited the book, School Bullying, New Theories in Context, published with Cambridge University Press. She has developed new theory on bullying and social exclusion anxiety, and published Bullying and Humor and on Dilemma of Victim Positioning. This interplay between bullying and violence, computer games, and digital interaction is also one of her research areas. Second, Micheal is a professor of information systems and also Deputy Dean for Research Internationalization in Commerce, faculty at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. Micheal is rated researcher by South Africa National Research Foundation, and his research has contributed with new important knowledge on mobile bullying, as well as on security ICT, registration, alignment, and governance. He is the principal investigator for mobile bullying projects funded by the South African National Research Foundation that he will be talking about this joint keynote. He has co-authored an article on the effect of social, cultural, psychological, and technological factors on reporting mobile victimization in South African schools, and also contributed to discussion and testing of topology of mobile phone victimization. A warm welcome to Dorte Marie Søndergaard and Micheal. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth, for this generous introduction. We have some 42 minutes ahead of us, so we are going to eat a little of your coffee break. Hope you can bear with that. And Micheal and I have looked very much forward to this opportunity to share with you some of our research insights. We'll be talking about bullying, bringing in, come up here, you stand behind me. Okay. We'll be talking about bullying, bringing in rather different, actually, ways of knowing about this important topic and also ways of addressing it. Some of our methods emerge from quantitative, some from qualitative, and some from mixed method studies, but also from theoretically based analysis and from literature reviews.
So for almost 50 years, we've gathered extensive and important knowledge regarding bullying and these destructive and hurtful practices among children. Thanks to this dedicated work, we have access to knowledge about the prevalence of bullying across countries, age, gender, a range of other human characteristics and behaviors. We have descriptive knowledge about the kinds of behavior involved. We know something about so-called risk factors, although generalization here are sometimes difficult to rely on. And we know about harmful effects, as well as potential and different kind of long-term consequences. Comprehensive research initiatives have been dedicated to the development of bullying intervention and prevention programs, although the enduring hope of providing ambiguous evidence for the effectiveness of generalized intervention strategies remains unfulfilled when faced with complex and violent nature of everyday life. We do know something about what works out there.
We definitely do have knowledge about what it takes to produce environments at school and in other social contexts that enhance children and young people's well-being, but there are many aspects, indeed whole areas, of this troubling phenomenon that we don't know enough about. We don't know enough about the mechanisms and social dynamics that are involved in bullying, neither about the meaning and effect of digital communication and the consequences and practices embedded in, for instance, hyperexposure of intimate, humoristic, and vicious images and chats.
We will each, from our perspectives, address these issues in what follows. Dorte will share some of the knowledge produced in a large interdisciplinary research project initiated in 2007 in Denmark. And I will take over and share some of the findings from ongoing projects. It's an ongoing project which was initialized in 2016 in South Africa, where I'll share something about the nature of mobile bullying and bully victim behavior. Thank you. Okay.
So now I'll take over for the next 20 minutes. When the Danish research project XBus began our work, we were really puzzled by the mystery of what drives the obviously hurtful and destructive ways of relating to peers that we term bullying. The eagerness to harass and to show contempt, to humiliate, exclude, all those things, we really wanted to know what produced, what maintained, and perhaps even dissolve such ways of relating socially. To investigate this, we were not all that interested in counting predefined phenomena and categories. We were more sort of eager to look into the dynamics and the complicated social processes involved. We wanted to understand, not to produce descriptions and overviews. So we conducted hundreds of interviews, qualitative interviews with school children and early teens, as well as interviews with teachers, with parents, principals, and youth workers. And we spent many, many hours observing young people's social interactions, reading their essays, doing ethnographic fieldwork, that sort of things. And after some years, we also conducted a survey among 1,052 early teenagers focusing on school life, well-being, and their experiences of bullying. While analyzing this material, the idea, at that time widespread in much popular discourse about bullying, and actually also in research, this idea that bullying is the result of some kind of destructive urge, in particular individual children, that idea became more and more irrelevant somehow. The individualizing perspective faded out as irrelevant as we worked with the research material as a basis for understanding and theorizing. In the green box up here, you can see the examples of the kinds of theories that inspired us analytically in this work. So in our research material, we did not see children morally disengaged or without empathy. We saw school environments intertwined by an obviously growing anxiety of social exclusion among all children, and we saw how this anxiety further intertwined with a shared and strong desire to belong to a social group, a community of peers. These were dominating processes among the children in bullying-infected environments and, as a matter of fact, also among the adults in such contexts. And this led me and some others to continue looking into and analyzing in still more detail what we termed social exclusion anxiety, and simultaneously led Helle Rabel Hansen to elaborate on the concept of longing for belonging. These two concepts became some of our very important cornerstones in our shared theorizing of bullying in this interdisciplinary research project. The anxiety that one will be excluded from belonging to whatever small social community one is supposed to be part of appears to be a strong and common driver in bullying practices, not in and of itself, but through a whole range of interconnected social mechanisms that emerge in its wake. It is the kind of anxiety that often arises when social groups come under pressure. And that isn't all that surprising when you think about it. I mean, humans are existentially dependent on social embeddedness. And when this belonging is threatened, when it's jeopardized, exclusion anxiety begins to grow and to demand a response. I will return to this response in a minute, but first, social embeddedness may come under pressure in any number of ways. We talked about the Trump rhetoric yesterday, so that's at one level, but at a more local level, an example would be school classes experiencing pressure and becoming vulnerable if adults don't help them build a culture in the group that offers dignity and appreciation and secures belonging for all its members, that is, every child in every class. This appreciation and belonging need to embrace diversity at all levels: socioeconomic diversity, racial, gendered, sexual, diversity in relation to learning capacities, and differences of all kinds. If such efforts fail or are simply not initiated, I mean, the efforts to try to create these safe communities, if the opposite happens and the culture building groups of children and young people is saturated by a strong focus on prestige and hierarchies among the children, perhaps the responsible adults even use authority strategies where they ridicule and humiliate, etc. These are just examples. But if in such cases, uneasiness and anxiety starts to spread. Who's okay? Who belongs? Who should be despised? Such questions and kinds of attention begins to circulate within the group. And that uneasiness calls for a response. The unpleasant emotion of anxiety seeks assuagement, and one seemingly effective alleviation strategy that kept returning in our research data is for social groups to gather and confirm belonging by building strong walls around their local group, their community of belonging, making it quite clear who is in and who is out. This can be achieved in a number of different ways, but among them, it can be achieved through the production of targeted contempt for someone outside the group. Such mechanisms are seen within small groups, small social groups, but also in larger communities. Targeted hatred draws a community together. It strengthens social bonds and offers identity and apparent security to its members. Now, if intervention and prevention programs are conceived from an exclusively individualizing perspective, focusing on individual children that appear particularly aggressive or vulnerable, while remaining blind to the social environment and culture that produce the pressure, the tensions, and thereby these bullying mechanisms, if that is the way adults approach intervention, it's most likely bound to fail. In our research material, we saw repeated examples of school classes where still new children filled the positions as perpetrators and victims following any effort to counter bullying for as long as interventions were exclusively addressing individual children, while the classroom culture and social environment was not addressed, was not transformed. And we interviewed children that had been pointed out as those that were aggressive and bullying and had changed school, who told that in this new school environment, it was so relieving that they didn't have to fight so hard for their prestige and for their own safety. This is probably also why the whole school approach does make a lot of sense in terms of prevention and intervention of bullying and marginalization. But let me go a bit more into detail here, and you cannot read the top of it. I just left our definition, which is a bit long, sorry. It's Robin May Schott and I made this definition, and you can, if you get access to the PowerPoints, you can read it later. It's also in that book. But now I go a bit more into detail with the mechanisms. Living in a group under pressure and with all the insecurity, tensions, and social threats that implies is really, really hard work. Thus, the very possibility of translating that anxiety into control, into active participation in the formation of the hierarchy among children, that is a typical strategy used to alleviate social exclusion anxiety, to get to feel a little safer and a bit more in control for a while. It's not the only strategy, but it's quite widespread. Together, the group can elaborate and reinforce the conditions for belonging and also demand ongoing confirmation of loyalty from its members. And that loyalty is often displayed through a growing and shared contempt for specific others. Particular children can be designated as sort of flashpoints that clearly demarcate the boundaries around the community by his or her appointed incarnation of the excluded, the disgusting, the not us. So the object of bullying is pressured to function as the exterior which contributes to the cohesion of the interior of the social group. And empathy now turns to group members, while closing radically down in relation to excluded persons. It's not that those inside the group and those that bully lose their capacity to feel empathy, but empathy turns selectively towards their own. Judith Butler uses the concept of abjection, the abjected other, to analyze such processes of boundary making. Now, who's designated in this way, you may ask? Well, that actually appeared in our data to be pretty unpredictable. Sometimes it's a child that is already vulnerable, not good at football or without access to digital communication because the parents won't or cannot provide a smartphone, if it's that kind of environment. Perhaps someone grieving after death in the family or having a disabled brother. Everything, anything that can be picked out and used to justify disgust and exclusion. In other cases, however, the opposite is true. The group turns against the child that was previously popular and had a strong position in the class, but now the group turns against him and or her and makes a strong investment in redefining the boundaries. Such a shift in the hierarchy can emphasize the hierarchy's contours. In yet other cases, the target may be the child who appeared too popular among the teachers in a classroom that has built a culture of dignity on distancing students from schoolwork and from teacher authority. I bet you also recognize that kind of school classes in your countries. We have a lot of them in Denmark. So you never know who will be the target, who will become the next target, or how long they will remain in the victim position. Sometimes the positionings change quite rapidly, actually. Being inside or outside, belonging or not belonging to the group may change within a matter of weeks, even days. Other children remain marginalized and bullied for years, or in some cases throughout their entire school life. Social exclusion anxiety, contempt production, ridicule, shaming are all such phenomena involved in bullying travel along into the digital spaces that children and young people inhabit. The analog and digital lives they live with each other and with children and young people they may never have met are, as we all know, totally infiltrated. And the material and discursive conditions for analog play that frame their expressions of friendship, belonging, their fights with and love for each other, those conditions are now infiltrated by the technological affordances built into the platforms they visit and through which they communicate. So Snapchat and Instagram and the chat functions built into the gaming universes condition the possibility for forming communities of belonging and also the possible ways to confirm friendships or to nurture relations of hatred and contempt in varying ways. YouTube videos, but also platforms such as Reddit and the politically incorrect subsites of 4chan and 8chan, and for early teens, not to forget Pornhub, offer inspirations as to how identities and social relating may be performed. Children and young people use and address the digital spaces actively and sometimes in quite innovative ways. Nevertheless, the technological affordances, the algorithms, invite particular kinds of behavior and relating. And this is a vital part of children and young people's material and discursive everyday life conditions. Some aspects of digital analog relating and potential bullying are very well known. The opportunities to gather support for potential hatred and aggression towards a specific person are digitally formed by the generosity of technological outreach, via the speed by which communication can be disseminated, and the possibility of keeping a distance while being able to find the chosen victim anywhere, because young people are constantly open to communication as they carry the digital screen with them at all times as a technological extension of their body and mind, as we do as adults. These are phenomena widely described and analyzed in research literature over the last decades. But there is something else that needs careful attention. The consequences of digital youth culture that demands the sharing of more or less intimate pictures as part of one's belonging and relating have become central in relation to bullying practices. The inherent hyper-exposure of digital images, of small videos and pictures and memes shared with friends or in groups, produce still new standards for access to belonging and for navigating social exclusion anxiety, boundary making, and the production of contempt. And as sexuality enters the lives of early teenagers, the navigation of such digital imagery and its affordances tends to become quite challenging, actually. From our new project on digital sexualized practices among young people, it's a project I do together with Pernille Rasmussen, we know that boys' sharing of sexualized imagery with friends in their community of belonging can be quite stressful. For instance, sharing of videos of one's own sexual acts or the acts of others may be a taken for granted sign of loyalty to the group. So if a boy is to maintain belonging, he may have to produce and offer that kind of material, sometimes putting not only himself but also his young partner at risk. And where bullying lurks in the shadows of teenage social groups, the increased communication via intimate imagery may become outright dangerous, threatening some with almost unfettered exposure and shame, causing what we might call social death. In our research material, and this is still the project I do with Pernille Rasmussen, who has done the major part of the data collection in terms of interviews and observations and cyber ethnography going in and out of darknet. In this material, we also see girls trying to adjust to new norms where the sharing of intimate pictures is considered an ambivalent and risky yet necessary path to to social status, or even a precondition of getting or holding on to a boyfriend. So the old passing note, some of you will remember it from your school time in school, the old passing note going handwritten, I like you, do you want to hang out, or can we meet behind the bike shed, I think you're really beautiful. That analog kind of handwritten messages have now been partially replaced by sending of intimate images, and then waiting and hoping for a response and perhaps a suggestion to offline hooking up. And if it doesn't work, you can try again with a little less close on. Intimate pictures, however, may be obtained by other boys and girls in a number of different ways too. In whichever way the image may have been produced and shared and may have traveled, the persons that get hold of such pictures apparently gather a kind of capital that can be used against the depicted person, if convenient, as they put it. So, if the depicted person, as part of the volatile social movements within the school, gradually or suddenly finds her or himself lower in the various social hierarchies, such material can be used to shame and to bully the person in very effective ways. And this happens to girls mostly, but also to boys. And in those cases, and there are many, not only in Denmark, but all over the world, where the material finds its way to platforms for global distribution and trading, these teens become targets of psychological and, socially speaking, highly dangerous attacks from people whose identity is hidden in the veil of anonymity that the internet provides. So there are some new trends here that call for serious attention. The intertwining of bullying and shaming with sexualized digital practices and youth culture causing serious damage to some young people. This attention, however, needs balancing. Sexualized digital communication is common practice today and should not be condemned or prohibited in general. The destructive version of it should, however, be seriously addressed by researchers and practitioners. Yours.
Thank you, Mari. Thank you, Mari. Thank you, Dorte, Mari. Now, my presentation, I'm going to try and make it also a little bit brief because we kind of ran out of time. Our project began actually in 2014. But the funding came in effectively, I think, at the beginning of 2016 from the South African National Research Foundation. It's a project-driven project, if I may put it that way, and we collaborate with a number of people from the rest of Africa. What drove us into this was the little knowledge about mobile bullying. So research on cyberbullying is conducted, and many times we take the umbrella definition of cyberbullying and we tend to forget specifically what is escalating as much as possible these days, which relates to mobile bullying. Of course, mobile bullying is part of cyberbullying, but the main emphasis here is on the use of mobile technology and the features we have in the mobile system applications in order to commit these forms of bullying. So it's escalating in many schools today, and interventions are limited given the nature of the type of bullying that we have now and an understanding of what it is. And yesterday I talked about something like, I talked about what we do, what we call digital readiness, digital forensic readiness, bringing up teachers and educators and communities in understanding how do you deal with a situation where there has been bullying that has been committed using a mobile phone. So there is much that we need to be looking at here, but also in addition to that, the theory development in terms of what exactly causes mobile bullying as opposed to other forms of bullying. And also theory development in areas of mobile bully victims. Now, very little is talked about mobile bully victims. Yesterday when I was commenting, I said out of about 4,000 responses that we get from the participant, 10% of those can be categorized as mobile bully victims. So what do we do about these people, and how can we go about it? So bullying in general is a complex situation, as you can see. Our approach to this studying and understanding bullying has mainly been relating to the interactions between the forces that are playing a part in bullying. So we look at the interactions of these forces. We look at the distinctive powers of these forces. So we talk about, for instance, things like gender. We talk about things like anonymity. We talk about things like technology advancement. So what are the powers, the distinctive powers of these kind of forces? And also these kind of forces operating, together. So we look at that. I'm so glad that yesterday, we had a presentation on the whole school approach, something we also try to adopt, and which has been emphasized by the National Department of Education. Whole school approach as something that is looking beyond the schools, the teachers, the parents, the community, and so on, in order to be able to find interventions to this problem. So given that kind of background, we conduct our research mainly quantitatively, but we're fully aware of the limitations of quantitative methods, so we kind of supplement using some qualitative methods. But as you see as I go along, you'll see that much of our work is quantitative in nature. So we collect large data, and we try to study the complex patterns that do exist. We aim to generalize. It's quite, as I indicated earlier, it's not very easy, but it's sometimes difficult. But we try as much as possible to see if we can be able to generalize. But we also try to look at the theoretical validity of our measures. Definitions about bullying, cyberbullying, and other forms have been involving, a bit, some debatable issues on what we should call it and what we shouldn't call it. And also the measures that we use in order to measure what is bullying. So theoretical validity of the measures we use, we put much emphasis into that so that we can make sure that we come up with appropriate interventions. So a bit about what we do here, about 35 schools, involved in this project across 6 provinces. Those who have not been to South Africa, I think you can see the different provinces: Limpopo, Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal, Free State, the Eastern Cape, and also the Western Cape. We haven't gone into other provinces. Hopefully we'll do that. We've got about 8,000 grade 8 to 12 participating in our project. Sometimes we go back to the schools and we interact. And we normally use surveys which include multiple item bullying scales. We can integrate in open-ended questions. And we're now getting into the digital applications as a way by which we can be able to intervene. So I've got about 9 PhD students, 2 postdocs, and other students who are involved in this. What we do, we prepare them and we teach them how to develop mobile applications, and unfortunately I can't show you some. I've got some on my cell phone. So they develop these applications and give them to the students anonymously. So we just get a code from a student and we keep on monitoring the behavior aspects. So far the students are finding the applications more useful. They can communicate, they can link up to resources where they can get help. They can report. They can interact with us, of course, electronically, which they find quite important and very useful. So we follow, like I believe everyone else does this, we try to follow ethical standards in doing this, get permission from provincial governments, schools, principals, parents, and students, and also, of course, my university, and I believe any other university, puts a lot of emphasis on, ethical standards before the instruments are sent out. So a little bit about some of our findings. Like, first thing we see is that mobile bullying differ by phone advancement. And we would expect that someone who's got a smartphone, okay, in that case, and is a bully, would definitely be involved in more bullying. But it doesn't mean that whoever's got a smartphone is a bully. And I'll show you something different interesting about that. So what we see in chat rooms slightly may differ from what we see from those who are communicating using MMS or in other facilities. Like, for instance, I'll be talking to you about the effect of gender. We see that effect in chat room, effect of loss of self-esteem. We see that in the communication via chat room. And maybe that also takes us back to visiting the definitions. Sometimes the definitions, someone could say that the perpetrator or the bully would not be able to see the victim. However, in chat rooms, once you're communicating these in chat rooms, some people even use these emojis and so on, you can begin to see the effect and the response of what the impact has been, either through the direct comments by the other people within the group or other people who are really participating in that. The other element, the other aspect which is important, is the school context. And I'm glad someone talked about it yesterday. School context can depend on how you've defined it. Could include school leadership, could include the boundaries, the environment in which the students live, and so on. So we can see that school context has got a lot of influence on mobile bullying. We see that mobile bullying is more controlled in independent schools than in state-owned schools. And one of the reasons we can give is that independent schools tend to have mechanisms and controls and means by which, and resources by which you can be able to address this. Something we don't see much in public schools. We also looked at the effect of anonymity. That is to say, normally we would ask, are you aware of who bullied you, who was involved in that, and so on. So we see that has got an impact on involvement in bullying, but it has also got immediate effect in mobile bullying. If I had more time, I would show you how we did that using regression analysis, and we compare the two, results to see the changes in the effect. So that's something for us to note. In another study we conducted in rural South African, environment, and we also looked at those factors like location, age, gender, self-control, technological factors, or frequency of use, and so on. Again, we can see that bullies mainly come from areas that are unstable. We also see that we find that in some of our findings, there is consistency with what has been found in other studies across the world. However, in other cases, we find that it's not. Like, for instance, the one study which was conducted by Fagan and the rest say that in a disorganized neighborhood, collective efficacy may increase, the female delinquents. Now, we don't find that. And this could be very much due to the context. It could be very much due to the collectiveness of the communities, in our country or in parts of the developing world, whereby the community and the cultural aspects could have much influence on how these people would behave. Also, one thing that we see in terms of bullying is that bullying can be committed using various ways on a mobile system. One common one we pick is teasing. And teasing could be defined in many different ways. It could be accepted by different people. The perspectives could also be different. There are those who would take something which is communicated online as teasing, as a general, to want to affect. But some other people, cultural people, could say, from a cultural background, could take it more seriously and offensive. So that's something for us to note. The other one that we need to talk about, I talked about the chat groups and the chat room and the problems we experience within the chat groups. Age is also another issue that we need to monitor. One of the studies that we see is that forms of bullying will reduce at the age of 15 and then pick up again at the age of 16, 17. And especially 16, 17 age, I don't know why that is happening. We can only give some reasons, but I think could be many other reasons that could explain that. Could be that maybe new people get into the school, could be that emphasis on preventive measures are mainly focused at the initial years when you're getting into high school, but as you leave high school, as you get into the final exam, matric and all that, then, this kind of, bullying is repeated again. Okay, so it's very important that we look into this. This is one study, part of the study that analysis we did, just to try and see what happens if you are previously bullied using traditional methods and what is happening to you now as a bully. So here we are looking at the female mobile bully victims. All right? So what we can see in this case, we see some kind of trends. We see cases whereby across the age, there is an increase, and in some cases, there are decreases. I want to talk specifically about the self-control and retaliation. So we see that if you previously have been victimized, or in other words, experienced bullying previously, now for the female bully victims, that persists over a period of time. So you can see, like in this case, if you look at the self-control path and the retaliation path, towards the age of 17 and 18, it picks up again. Okay, so those are kind of things that we need to look at. Technology, it drops. That is, the influence of technology drops. However, it doesn't go away. It just drops, but still is one of the factors that are influencing mobile bullying. All right. So basically, this is what we do in our study. I haven't got enough time to talk about victimization and the typologies that we produced. Okay, and I haven't got time to talk about the digital applications that are developed by our students and how we use them. Hopefully, sometime in future, we can do that. But basically, what we do, we use design science as our approach in order to develop this. Much of our research, the literature review, and the background research we do informs what we are going to do next in the development of the interventions that we are putting ahead. So going forward, there are areas that we look at here, getting into understanding mobile bully victims, getting to develop theories that relate to that. We also want, going forward, getting more into how can we get to train teachers and community leaders about how to approach what we call digital forensic readiness. Okay, how do they approach these kind of situations, okay, in order to be able to address that? I think I'm going to end it there. Thank you very much.